Right now, as you're watching this video, investigators working the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie have been sitting on a piece of evidence for 70 days that most people following this case do not fully understand the significance of. And I need you to hear this clearly, because what I am about to walk you through is not a theory. It is not speculation. It is a sequence of events so precise, so tightly coordinated, so deliberately constructed that when you see it laid out minute by minute, the word accident will never enter your mind again.
This was not a random crime.
This was not an opportunistic attack. This was an operation. And at the center of that operation is a single phone call made at 1:44 in the morning to a woman who was home alone. And whoever made that call, investigators already know who they are. And this is not speculation. This is not some talking head guessing about what might happen. This is what the evidence actually shows. 70 days into this investigation, the most important clue was not found at a crime scene. It was not pulled from a surveillance camera. It was not extracted from a vehicle during a 66-day forensic teardown. It was sitting in Nancy Guthrie's phone. Intact. Untouched. A complete record of exactly who called her 3 minutes before her world went dark. And authorities have had that information from the moment they picked up that phone. So buckle up. Because in this video, I am going to walk you through exactly what that 1:44 a.m. call tells us, exactly what happened in the 44 minutes that followed it, exactly what the blood on the porch and the neighborhood internet blackout tell us about the level of planning behind this crime, and exactly why the 70 days of public silence from investigators is not a sign of a case going cold. It is a sign of a case being built to be unbeatable. So if you are following this case, if you care about justice for Nancy Guthrie, if you want to understand what investigators are actually sitting on right now, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Because I want to hear from everyone following this story. All right, let's get into it. So let me start with the call. Because everything in this case flows from the call. At 1:44 in the morning, a single communication hit Nancy Guthrie's phone. One call. In the middle of the night. And Nancy answered it. And I want you to think about that for a second. Because most of us, if our phone rang at 1:44 in the morning, would feel a jolt of alarm. We would look at the screen at 2:28 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker signal ends. 44 minutes. From the first call to the last signal. A sequence so tight, so coordinated, so perfectly timed that it could not have been improvised. Every step in that sequence required preparation. Every step required knowledge. And every step required at least two people acting in coordination. Because the person on that call and the person 5 miles away at 1:52 cannot be the same person. This was not a lone actor following an impulse. This was a coordinated operation with moving parts. And the call at 1:44 was the trigger that set all of those parts in motion simultaneously. And then there is the porch. Because I need you to understand what investigators found when they examined the area outside Nancy's front door. There was blood. Blood on the porch. Which means that after Nancy received that call, after that camera went dark, something happened at her front door. She likely opened it. And whoever was on the other side was not there for a conversation. The violence began immediately. Right there on the porch. In the dark. With the camera already disabled and the neighborhood about to go even darker. And that brings me to the detail that tells you more about the sophistication of this operation than almost anything else. A neighborhood internet blackout occurred during the attack. Not just Nancy's cameras. The broader neighborhood network went down during the window of the crime. And I need you to understand what that means operationally. Disabling a single camera is one thing. Engineering a localized internet outage in a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night is something else entirely. Something that requires technical knowledge. Something that requires advanced planning. Something that was done for 3 specific purposes. To disable security cameras beyond Nancy's own property. To erase or prevent cloud backup of any footage that might have captured the operation. And to limit the digital footprint of everyone involved in the moments that mattered most. That is not something an opportunistic criminal does. That is something a sophisticated, technically capable, extensively prepared operation does. And whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. Now let me talk about what the caller had to know. because this is where the suspect pool gets very small very quickly. To make that call at 1:44 in the morning and have it function as a go signal, the caller needed specific information. They needed Nancy's private phone number, not a public listing, not a number you find with a basic search, a private number that you have because you are close enough to this family to have it. They needed to know that Nancy was home that night, not guessing, knowing. They needed to understand her routine and her schedule well enough to know that the window was right. And they needed to know that she was alone, that the son-in-law had gone, that no one else was there, that the house was down to one person,
Nancy.
And here is where the January 31st dinner becomes absolutely critical, because investigators have zeroed in on that evening for a reason. Everyone present at that dinner knew Nancy's schedule. Everyone there knew who had dropped her home. Everyone there knew that she would be alone for the rest of that night. The information about Nancy's vulnerability that night, her schedule, her location, the absence of anyone else in that house, that information existed inside a very specific circle of people. A circle defined by who was at that table on January 31st. And somewhere inside that circle, that information was passed to someone who used it to plan a crime. And I want you to really sit with that. Because that is not a theory about a stranger who got lucky. That is a theory about a betrayal. About someone who sat at a table with his family, shared a meal, and then used what they learned at that table to take Nancy Guthrie from her home in the middle of the night. That is the kind of thing that makes a community stop breathing for a moment when it fully lands. Now, let me tell you about the phone. Because Nancy's phone was left behind. Intact. Complete. Fully intact with its call logs, its data, its complete record of every communication. And investigators had it from the very beginning. Which means that from the moment law enforcement walked into that house on the morning of the disappearance, they had access to the call log. They could see the 1:44 a.m. call. They could see the number. They could trace it. And in a world where every phone number is tied to an identity, tracing that call to a known individual in Nancy's inner circle was not a months-long investigation. That was day one work. Which means investigators have known who made that call for a very long time. And the fact that they have not yet made a public arrest is not because they do not know. It is because knowing and proving beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law are two completely different things. And these investigators are determined to do the second one as thoroughly as they did the first. And this brings me to what legal experts say investigators are building toward. Because the 1:44 a.m. call is not just evidence of a crime. It is the foundation of a specific and very serious legal theory. In federal conspiracy law, a conspiracy charge requires what is called an overt act, a concrete, documented action taken in furtherance of the conspiracy. And a phone call made at 1:44 in the morning, 3 minutes before a camera goes dark, to a victim who was then found bleeding on her porch with her pacemaker going silent 44 minutes later, is about as textbook an overt act as a federal prosecutor could ask for. That call is the moment the conspiracy became real. The moment it moved from planning to execution. And it is sitting in Nancy's phone, documented, time-stamped, and traceable, waiting for the moment investigators decide the rest of the case is ready to stand beside it in court. And that is why the silence from investigators over these 70 days is not a mystery. It is a message. It is the sound of a case being assembled with the kind of care and precision that mirrors the precision of the crime itself. Every piece of evidence locked into its chain of custody. Every digital record preserved and authenticated. Every connection between the call and the camera blackout and the internet outage and the blood on the porch documented in a way that tells a complete and unbreakable story. Because the people who planned this crime were careful. And the people building the case against them are going to be more careful still. Let me bring this down to what it means in human terms. Because 70 days is a long time to carry what Nancy's family is carrying. And the cruelest part of what this evidence suggests is that the people who did this were not strangers who appeared out of nowhere. They were known. They were trusted. They sat close enough to this family to have a private phone number and dinner table knowledge, and the kind of access to Nancy's routine that only comes from proximity and trust. And that kind of betrayal does not just take a person. It takes a piece of everything the people left behind thought they knew about their world. Here is where things stand today. The 1:44 a.m. call has been identified as the central piece of evidence in this investigation. Investigators trace the call to a known individual within Nancy's inner circle. The 3-minute gap between the call and the camera blackout indicates the call served as a coordinated go signal. The full timeline from 1:44 a.m. to the 2:28 a.m. pacemaker disconnect shows a precisely planned 44-minute operation. Blood on the porch confirms violence occurred immediately after the camera was disabled. A neighborhood internet blackout during the attack indicates deliberate technical planning to suppress digital evidence. The caller had access to Nancy's private number, her schedule, and knowledge that she was home alone. Investigators believe the information about her vulnerability originated from people present at the January 31st family dinner. Nancy's phone was left behind intact, giving investigators immediate access to call logs and caller identity from day one. And legal experts believe the 1:44 a.m. call is being used as the overt act at the foundation of a federal conspiracy charge. Whoever made that call at 1:44 in the morning believed they had covered their tracks. They disabled cameras. They blacked out the neighborhood. They left no obvious trace. But they left the phone. Nancy's phone. With every call logged, with every timestamp intact, with the entire story of that night sitting in an evidence bag in the hands of investigators who have known the truth for a very long time and are almost ready to tell it in court. Justice for Nancy Guthrie is coming, and I'm going to be here covering every step of it as it unfolds. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure those notifications are on. And I will see you in the next one.